Let's get started with that first problem. Intrinsic human value on a naturalistic worldview. Let's think about the species Homo sapien, a sack of muscles and juices and chemicals that are put together in a sack of skin. What is it about the human species that is intrinsically morally valuable? Well, what would we need to have something be intrinsically morally valuable about humans? Well, I'd like to contend that we need two things. First, we need something that's objectively true about human persons. And two, something that's truly important. So it's objectively true that human beings have 2 arms, 2 legs, and 1 belly button. But that's not truly important. For example, if somebody had 1 less appendage than the rest of us, they wouldn't be less valuable. If somebody had 2 kidneys and somebody had 1, that wouldn't make one person more valuable than another. Why? Because it's just not important. Likewise, men and women wouldn't be equal value because they have different body parts. And if you need an explanation on that, you can go back to 10th grade health class for a discussion. Let's think of some of the differences about humans. Is it what? That we walk upright? I sure like that opposable thumb that we have. Dexterity? Is it what? Is it some kind of physical property about humans that makes them valuable? That can't be it. Is it our intelligence? Well, you say, yeah, somebody like a Stephen Hawking is more valuable because he has more of an intelligence. Last I heard before he passed away, Hawking had an IQ of 190, maybe higher. Once you get to 190, it's like, we don't know what to do with you, okay? But we're not talking about instrumental value. Instrumental, like using someone as an instrument for an end. We're saying intrinsic, that just the person, him or herself, is valuable. So if you're going to hire somebody for a job, you might say that one person is more instrumentally valuable to work at this company, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about intrinsic human value. So if we had Stephen Hawking and Forrest Gump, to make a reference from 25 years ago in cinema, if we had these two sitting next to each other, would we say that one of them is more valuable than another because one of them has an IQ that is 3 times higher than the other? That can't be it. What about sentience? This has been real popular in the philosophical literature. Sentience, if you read 6 different definitions, you get 7 different answers. It's kind of difficult to define. Sentience, to give a really basic understanding, is to be able to perceive thoughts, to not just have thoughts, but to know that you're thinking, to perceive emotions, and to perceive pain or pleasure. But that can't be it. Because what about people who lack sentience? What about somebody who is anesthetized? What about somebody who's in a coma? What about persons who are recently born, infants, who lack sentience? They don't have that third order consciousness, not just the thought that I'm having, but that I am having a thought. Newborn infants don't have that. What about people who are severely mentally handicapped? That can't be the reason. Well, if we point to any one of these attributes of humans, one of the basic problems that we face is speciesism. You might say, what's that? Well, if racism is the unjustified valuing of one race over another, and if sexism is the unjustified valuing of one sex over another, speciesism would be the unjustified raising of one species over another. That is to say, why would we value and confer value to the Homo sapien species? Don't believe me? Richard Dawkins, the atheistic biologist, in his 2004 book, The Devil's Chaplain, says this. He says human beings, referring to value of human beings, he says this is flagrant speciesism. He says later, quote, human speciest vanity. The thought that you're going to look at all the species and say, well, that one species, that's the one that's really valuable. On what basis do you do so? Asks Richard Dawkins. Peter Singer, the atheistic bioethicist at Princeton University, he says humans who bestow superior value on the lives of all human beings solely because they are members of our own species are judging along lines strikingly similar to those used by white racists who bestow superior value on the lives of other whites. Merely, why? Because they are members of their own race. Why should we believe, Singer asks, that the mere fact that a being is a member of the species Homo sapiens endows its life with some unique, almost infinite value? Why indeed, given naturalism? Why would we say of all the millions of species that one species has moral value? But the problem gets worse on a naturalistic worldview. What happens if we say that humans are valuable because of one of these physical properties? What happens if we take one or more of these away from a human being? Does that mean that we take away their moral value? Well, Peter Singer, again, this is from his book, Practical Ethics. Now, I'm not Quoting from atheistic websites here, okay? This is from a graduate textbook on ethics from an ethicist from Princeton. Singer says this: human babies are not born self-aware or capable of grasping that they exist over time. They are not persons. Do you see what he just did? He divorced being a human being from being a person. There's a bifurcation in Peter's worldview. Why? Because on his view, only those animals, either Homo sapiens or bonobos or chimpanzees who have sentience, those are the persons or the animals that have moral value. And so if a human being lacks sentience, that human being lacks moral value. What are the consequences of this view? Peter Singer says the life of a newborn is of less value than the life of a pig, a dog, or a chimpanzee. You might say, well, yes, they're potentially going to become of greater moral value. Yeah, but we're not talking about potentials. We're talking about actuals. When we're looking at that human baby, they're of less value. Jeffrey Reiman, another atheistic philosopher, he says the killing of infants is wrong. Oh, we agree. Good. Why? Because of an emotion that we naturally and rightly have toward infants. That is an intrinsic human value. That's extrinsic human value. That's that we value a human person, a baby, and so we confer that value onto them. It's not that they're valuable in and of themselves. And so Reiman writes, adults and children possess in their own right a property that makes it wrong to kill them. Infants, for the moment, do not. James Rachels, atheistic philosopher and ethicist, this is from his book, Created from Animals. He says, some unfortunate humans, perhaps because they have suffered brain damage, are no longer rational agents. What are we to say about them? Good question. What happens if we have a human being and you take away rationality? Then what? The natural conclusion, according to the doctrine we are considering, would be that their status is that of mere animals. And perhaps we should go on to conclude that they may be used as non-human animals are used, perhaps as laboratory subjects or as food. Now, I just want to tell you, you don't have this book sitting in front of you. I read the context for that statement. That's what he meant, okay? I'm quoting these authors faithfully. He says, of course, traditional moralists do not accept any such conclusion. Yeah? We should not treat a person worse merely because he has been so unfortunate, we might say, but this idea will not bear close inspection. Now, some people at this point will say, yes, but we have an alternative. What's that? Well, perhaps culture or society can give us moral value. Well, there's a difficulty with this. Imagine if I came up to you and I said, I, James Rochford, I value blank, whatever blank is. Would you have to value blank? Well, no. Good for you. There's 7.2 billion others of us out here. You can have your opinion about that, like you value one thing. That's your opinion. But the rest of us are out here too. We have our own opinions. Now, what would happen if I said lots of people value blank? Well, if one person lacks the sufficiency to give something objective moral value, how is adding a bunch of other people going to give it moral value? Do you see what I'm saying? If you have one zero and then you add 7.2 billion other zeros, what do you have? Zero. Think about it like this. We look at this $100 bill and we say, that's valuable. Oh, yeah, it is. I wish somebody would come up to me after this and give me one of those. That's valuable. But is it intrinsically morally valuable? I don't see how. Now, as a culture, we confer value to it. We give it value. But it itself is just a green piece of paper. It's a material piece of paper. Now you say, well, we're doing pretty good. I mean, everyone agrees that it has that value, and so we're doing pretty stable, and in that sense, it's objective. No, it isn't. What happens if we go through another Great Depression? What happens if you were living in post-World War II Germany, where inflation had skyrocketed so high that they were taking those little green pieces of paper by the bucketful down to the store just to buy a loaf of bread? If there was some kind of financial crash, that green piece of paper would turn into a green piece of toilet paper. It could immediately lose value that quickly. And so by saying we all agree on such and such doesn't make it true.